On the analysis and development of a meal detection algorithm for the artificial pancreas. I did this research under the mentorship of Rebecca Harvey, and my advisors were Professor Doyle and E.L. Dasso, and I did this in the Department of Chemical Engineering and at EUREKA. So, type 1 diabetes is autoimmune destruction of pancreatic beta cells, and as you can see in this picture right here, this is a functioning pancreas, and this is a diabetic pancreas, and you can see that there aren't any pancreatic beta cells in there. And what this does is it causes the production of insulin to cease, and this means that blood glucose levels are uncontrollable and exogenous insulin is required. And this is required because there is an acceptable range for blood glucose levels that we need to maintain. And these acceptable levels are from 70 milligrams per deciliter to 180 milligrams per deciliter. And anything below 70 milligrams per deciliter is considered hypoglycemia. And what hypoglycemia does is if we remain in that area for too long, it can lead to risks such as seizures, coma, and sometimes even death. And anything above 180 milligrams per deciliter puts us in the hyperglycemia state, which is more short-term effects such as dizziness, but if we remain there too long and too often, it can lead to chronic diseases such as blindness, heart disease, and it can lead to even the same kind of effects as hypoglycemia. So the current disease therapy is self-monitoring using the finger stick, which is the image on your left right here, and then and with those blood glucose levels that are red, then you just inject multiple insulin into the body to help maintain that acceptable insulin range. So the future of disease therapy that our group is currently working on is the artificial pancreas. And what we want to do is make a fully automatic system where it's able to detect blood glucose levels and then insert insulin in relation to what those blood glucose levels read. So what the artificial pancreas consists of is the continuous glucose monitor, also known as CGM, which is right there. And what it does is it uses subcutaneous sensing with sensors on the body right there. And it sends the data every 5 minutes into the artificial pancreas system. And what the artificial pancreas system is, it's essentially the brain of the system. It has the controller and a safety system in it. And what it does is it takes the controller, which is right here, just takes the data from the CGM, and with the relation to that blood glucose levels, it'll insert insulin according to maintain that acceptable range. And the safety system that's inside this artificial pancreas system is just a backup in case something goes wrong. It's there to alert the user and make sure everything is functioning. So what I've been working on this summer is the obstacle of meal detection, and why meals are such a problem for the just type 1 diabetics in general is that once we consume a meal, our blood glucose levels rapidly increase, and for type 1 diabetics, they don't have that insulin immediately responding to the rapid rise. And what it happens is, as you can see in this graph, it's kind of busy, but the blue line is what the actual blood glucose levels are. And you can see it goes well above the acceptable range. It goes past 300 milligrams per deciliter. And once the controller actually realizes, wow, this is increasing rapidly, it starts bolusing insulin just to get it down to that level. And what happens is it boluses too much insulin, and then the blood glucose levels start crashing and going into that hypoglycemia state, which is also bad. So what we want to do is we want to try and detect the meal at least less than 30 minutes after the meal has been consumed, and that way we could just bolus a little bit of insulin just to help keep it in that level. So my project goals were implementing the basic meal detection algorithm, and then establishing metrics that represent the desired qualities to see how well it works. And the metrics that I used were the time it took for the system to alarm a meal, the time it took for the insulin to respond to this meal, the number of false positives that were present, and false positives are just when a meal was detected even though it wasn't consumed. The number of false negatives, which is when even though a meal was consumed, it wasn't detected, and the number of true positives, which is successfully detecting a meal. And we want the alarm to be faster than the current controller response, just to be more efficient. And we want few false alarms, especially false positives, because like I said, if you put more insulin than is required at the moment, then you can go into that hypoglycemia state. And we want more true positives to show that our alarms are being efficient. So for my project, I took data from clinical trials that were done at the Sansom Diabetes Research Institute, and these were historical data. So there was 12 subjects, each were given breakfast and dinner with no meal announcement. And just the time frame, it was a 24-hour period. The subject came in and they received a meal which was around 50 grams of carbohydrates. And that, just put it in perspective, is just a sandwich and a fruit. And then the data throughout the whole day was taken, and this was just to test the controller and safety system. But I use this data for the algorithm and system alarming. So how the algorithm works is it takes the blood glucose levels that are read by the CGM, which is the red dotted line, and it takes the data and uses 3 points to fit it into a polynomial, and with that polynomial, it'll take the third point and take the first derivative to predict the slope. And with that slope, it'll go through the parameters that we set for them. So the parameters that we set for them are, it had to be above a threshold, so in our case, it had to be above 110 milligrams per deciliter. And then it had to be within our min and max slope, so the slope had to be in between 1.8 to 3 milligrams per deciliter per minute. And then the third parameter that we set for them is the subsequent alarms required, also known as SAR, and that's what I was specifically working on. And what SAR 1, 2, and 3 mean is it would only need to meet the parameters once and it would alarm, or SAR 2 meant it needed to meet the parameters 2 times in a row and then it would alarm. And then the 3 is 3 times in a row and then it would alarm. And as you can see on this graph, it doesn't necessarily have to be one after the another, because the third one had to have more data points to alarm. And then the bottom graph just shows the insulin response, and this is just to show that if the insulin is responding before the alarm, it just shows that our alarm is inefficient. But if and we want the least amount of time between the alarm and the insulin to respond. So my hypothesis for this was that SAR1 would be faster at detecting a meal, but it would have more false positives since there's less data points that it needed to detect a meal. And then my second hypothesis was that SAR3 would take a longer time and it would have less false positives because of the more data points it needed to confirm that there was a meal, and then more false negatives because it would take longer and sometimes it wouldn't have the data to check the meal. So I ran the 3 algorithms, and this is pretty much just the information that I got for the time response. So as you can see, if you just focus on like the red, you can see that the red is shorter, which shows that it's responding faster to the alarms, and the blue is taller, so it took longer for it to respond to the alarms. And the dotted lines, dots at the bottom, just show that these were the undetected meals, so it didn't alarm at all. And the blue dots obviously have more undetected meals. So my results were that the better detector would be 1 and 2, just because it had a greater amount of true positives. It had 87.5%, and while the third one had a 75% true positive rate. They all had the same number of false positives, which is pretty surprising. But and then the average time difference from alarm to insulin delivery. The first one was faster. The negative just shows that it responded, the insulin responded after the alarm, while the positive just shows that insulin responded before the alarm, telling us that the SAR3 was not efficient at detecting the meal. So my conclusions are that my first hypothesis was unconfirmed. The SAR1 should have had more false positive alarms, and we think this is due to just the small sample size since it was only 24 meals, as well as we did cut the time frame down to 7 hours as opposed to 24 hours. So if we had the 24 hours, there would be more false positives apparent. As well as my second hypothesis was confirmed, as you saw, the SAR3 had more false negative alarms. My future work would be using the basic algorithm as a benchmark for a more advanced system, and then creating a more advanced meal detection algorithm and then comparing it to the current one. then using it with a larger data set, and then eventually, hopefully, putting it through clinical trials. And I'd like to thank our sponsors and EUREKA and my mentor Rebecca Harvey, Yal Dasso, Professor Doyle, Eric and Tyler. Thank you.
You mentioned that for, I think, arms number 1 and 2, that you have to fit the criteria of being above the threshold and then within certain bounds of the slope. Why the upper bound on the slope of 3 milligrams per deciliter per minute?
It's just what we set for it for this procedure. I think it's just because you want a gradual slope, and then if it's going too high, if it's just say like it's 5 or something, that just means maybe there's just a spike, and you don't want to put insulin if it's just like a spike. You don't want to put too much insulin in, because it could probably just go back down. But just for our case, we got to choose the parameters, and I just picked 1.8 to 3.
Is 85 for the 21 out of 24, is that good enough? And then I suppose what if that continued to infinity for the rest of their life, I guess? Is there any big setback to that, meaning any condition that they might develop from not being able to process those meals when insulin is injected?
So it just can get better. So 21 out of 24 is pretty good, but there's not really like, oh, is this bad or good? The more we can get, the better it is. And then your second question was
if they continue this on for years and years, only getting 85% of their meals, is there any problem with that besides maybe malnutrition is the only one I could think of?
So if we only get 85%, it just means that the meals were undetected and that they're going into that hyperglycemia state, and eventually that's going to catch up to them. So yes, it'd be bad, but we're just trying to improve more and more. So hopefully we can fix this algorithm and get it to pick up all of them.
What was your sample rate?
What?
Sample rate? Like how many insulins did you use from those?
So there was 24 meals and they all had 20 hours. But we cut it down to 7-hour periods for each meal.
You took a sample every 7 hours?
No, the sample, you mean for...
When you're measuring glucose.